Hello and welcome to The Thing About Golf, Golf Australia magazine's podcast series attempting to answer that eternal question. What draws us all to this extraordinary game? My name's Rod Morri and I'm your tour guide for these explorations into the minds of those for whom golf is more, so much more, than just a game. On episode 19, we're going to meet one of Australian golf's deepest thinkers. Bryden Macpherson will be a name familiar to a few of you, though it would be fair to say that even in golf circles, he's far from a high-profile figure. That, however, doesn't mean he's not interesting. In fact, Bryden might be one of Australia's most interesting players. We'll meet the 2011 British Amateur Champion in just a moment, but first I need to take care of some admin, starting with a special welcome for any first-time listeners. I hope you enjoy what you hear today, and I hope that you come back often to hear more. The podcast is available on all the major distribution platforms, so whether you prefer Spotify, Apple or Google Podcasts, we've got you covered. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. It's free and it downloads in the background whenever we release a new show without you having to do a thing. If it is your first time here, you might enjoy having a look through the back catalogue. From Richard Sattler and Mike Clayton to Sue Worcester and Meg McLaren, there's a host of great discussion and some real nuggets of wisdom to be found in the archives. If you hear something you particularly like, or even if you hear something you don't, feel free to reach out and let us know. You'll find me on Twitter at Rod_Morri, that's capital R-O-D _ capital M for Mary, O-R-R-I. My DMs are open, so anyone can send a message, and I do make a genuine effort to respond to them all. The show has its own handle at @ThingGolf, that's capital T-H-I-N-G, capital G-O-L-F, or you can seek out the magazine on Facebook, or if you're really old school, send us an email to golf@golfaustralia.com.au. Now on to today's episode, and when I first dreamed up the idea for The Thing About Golf, one of the names at the forefront of my mind was that of Victoria's Bryden Macpherson. I'd come across Bryden a couple of times in the course of my work, and every time I talked to him, I walked away with my mind whirring. Bryden is a good player. Clearly, you don't win the British Amateur and 3 times as a pro through luck. But more than that, he's an intriguing thinker, cut from a very different cloth to most golf pros that I've encountered. As an example, the first time I interviewed him on a podcast some years ago, he volunteered the story of the day he shot 90 at the Open. I didn't ask him to retell the tale on this show because it's been covered plenty of times before, but the fact that it happened and that he didn't bristle at the mention of it is just one of the things that sets Bryden apart. In this lengthy chat, you'll hear him talk about lots of stuff, both golf and non-golf related, and my hope, as it always is that you come away from the interview knowing something that you didn't know before. At the very worst, I hope you find the chat entertaining. And if the golf swing's your thing, make sure to stick around for the last 15 minutes or so, because I can assure you, it is well worth it. Well, Bryden, I guess, as you know, the podcast is called The Thing About Golf, so that's our jumping off point. What's the thing about golf for Bryden Macpherson?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I think the game has got a really sort of deep meaning, and it has this kind of parallel to everyday life. I think that it seems to leverage up everything we learn in life. Like, you know, the things that maybe take us a year to learn in life, we tend to learn in an afternoon on the golf course as well if we pay attention. I think that's a really cool thing about the sport. It seems to make, life tests your patience. Golf does it on a 10-time scale, and it seems to everything that we have to deal with in our lives seems to be leveraged up when you're on a golf course, and I think that's a cool challenge.
Yeah. That might be the deepest answer I've had yet to that question. Most of the golf pros I've interviewed, they've sort of sat back and said, oh, it's my life, which is a short way, I guess, of almost saying what you've just said there. Was that the appeal of it for you right from the start? We're going to come to it later, but I know that you're a thinker, probably to your own detriment sometimes in golf. I'm not sure that it's a great thing for a golfer. But was that one of the things that appealed to you early on? And how did you get your start in the game?
So I started when I was young. Both of my granddads played golf. So my mum's dad was a late-in-life avid social golfer, and my dad's dad was a very good player back in the day. So the 50s and 60s was kind of his heyday. He played number 1 for Woodlands, won their club championships 7 or 8 times, and played number one on their pennant team, so he played against, your Doug Backleys. Was really good friends with Doug Backley, actually. They were really close mates. And, Peter Thompson was a little bit younger, but not a lot younger. And that whole era of that sort of golden time in Victorian golf. So he was part of that. I didn't really know that when I was younger. I haven't really grown to appreciate it until now. So I sort of got a little bit of a bug when I was maybe 10 or 11. I'd play with my pop in New Zealand when I went over to see him. And my parents joined me up at Devil Bend Golf Club when I was 11. And I think once I started playing and got sort of encaptured by the constant challenge of the game, which I think is what got me in early, was like it's a endless pursuit of semi-perfection.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's what kind of hooked me in. As soon as I hit my first solid shot, that was it for me.
Uh-huh. It's funny, isn't it, that regardless of how deep or shallow you end up being involved in the game, it's the same starting point for everyone, I think. That first ball that comes out the middle of the club face, there's something about that which is addictive, unlike anything else I've ever encountered.
Well, it's quite a surreal thing. Even if you are 10 or 11 years old, but even if you're in your 20s or 30s or 40s and you're still beginning, to move a small ball, I think the physics and things involved of moving that thing 150 yards with this what seems like perfectly controlled ball flight is just a very amazing thing. Not many other sports have that kind of connection to, the physics of our world. And so I think that's a really cool thing that you can see, man, I made that happen. Uh-huh. And it has kind of a deep connection. And then there's the feeling in the hands of actually hitting the ball out of the middle, which is something very, very cool, I think.
Yeah. We'll come to some of the technology stuff later, because there's some interesting fundamental and legitimate questions for the game to ask. Interesting you mentioned Doug Backley. I didn't realise. There's a quite neat line there. You, of course, won the 2011 British Amateur. I don't know what year he won it, but I know it was in the 50s. But Doug Backley was a British Amateur champion too, wasn't he?
He was. I used to know this off the top of my head. I want to say it was 1956.
Just go grab the trophy and have a look. It'll all be on there. Your name there, and you can go back and find it.
Unfortunately, I cannot afford my replica just yet, but it's on the wait list in my Amazon cart. But yeah, that was a very cool thing for my granddad to have that connection, knowing, basically his best mate was the last Australian born, because Jin Jeong did win the year before as an Australian resident. But as someone who grew up in Melbourne, I think that's it's a very cool thing to have that kind of connection. Yeah. And it's still something that, especially for a while there, I sort of ran away from, as I prefer to have something larger to my name by this point in my life. But, more recently I've been coming back to it as it is a very cool thing to have on your CV. I'm very proud of it.
Just a quick diversion here. Jin Jeong, is that the best nickname in all sport? They call him the Doorbell.
The Doorbell, that's right. That's right.
It's one of the greatest things of all.
And the thing about it is that he laughs about it too.
He's a terrific young bloke, isn't he?
Fantastic.
It's a shame his game has not been what it was in his early days of late, but terrific young bloke and a good player and a great sense of humour, as you say. Did you get to meet Backley?
Never got to meet him. No, I really wish that I had have. It's a part of me that wishes I could go back to that era and just be a fly, not on the wall, but on the golf course. Maybe on that hut on the first tee at Vic and some of the pennant matches.
Some of the conversations that might have taken place on that first tee. Particularly when it was the 19th hole, there might have been some interesting conversations happening there as well. What was your path through golf development then? Because lots of people take up golf, lots of people like me, we fall in love with the sweet hit and all the rest of it. For most of us, we don't develop much beyond that. We stay hopeless for most of our lives. You've gone beyond that well and truly. What was that path like, that development?
So I started off, Devil Bend Golf Club just before I was turned 12. I started to play, the Saturday competitions. Saturdays turned into Saturdays and Sundays. I started getting lessons from the head pro at the time, who was Shane Johnson. Last that I heard, he was at Safety Beach last time I saw him. He's at Safety Beach now. Just an absolute ripper bloke. Absolute. And he's a dead ringer for Stuart Appleby as well. So when I was growing up. And having got to know Stuart a little bit, it's still very true. Shane's just awesome guy. And then I moved on to who was the trainee at the time, Christian Kiley, and then I moved on after I started playing Saturdays, Sundays, and Mondays after school, Wednesdays after school, Tuesdays after school, cursing daylight savings because I could only get 45 minutes of practice in, things like that. I was well and truly hooked into the game, and I started playing pennant for Devil Bend in the junior team, when it was handicap match play and things like that. Eventually built my way up to playing in the men's team. We won a flag, which was a big deal. We hadn't won a flag for a long time. Then I won the district championships when I was 15 or 14 for Peninsula District. That kind of really, now I look back on it, was a bit of a turning point because it was my first decent size men's event that I had won. It was at Devil Bend, and I think I won by 1 or 2. I started playing for the district, and then once I started playing for the district, then I started getting into the state team, things like that, the junior state team development level, and then I made it into the state team when I was 16. And then after playing my first year over in Perth under the stewardship of David Capaldo, I got my first taste for traveling for playing golf, and that was just awesome for me. And after that, I started entering some of the amateur tournaments, some of the junior tournaments, the Ivo Wittens, and made it into the men's state team for my first year in 2008. And then we won that one and the next one. And then I started playing for Australia. For me, there was always something new and something else that I could try and achieve. And that for me was a mirror, just the way that I could try and improve myself hole to hole when I played, and tried to get better all the time, day to day, week to week, month to month. The same thing kind of was true of my path upwards in the development stuff in Australia. So now looking back, I'm very grateful that there was a ladder for me to climb. It's not always true everywhere in the world, and I think Australia's got a really good system that needs to be preserved. Because you get kids being competitive and playing against each other and traveling together, is a great thing and I think it's one of the reasons why we've had so many great pros. And so after I started traveling internationally, I got an offer to go to Georgia for college when I was 19, which was complete happenstance. And looking back on it, it's just crazy how it happened. And, they're the best golf program in the States, best college golf program. They've won the most conference championships of any sport in US collegiate, the whole of every sport, men's and women's, everything. So that opportunity was fantastic, and got to meet a whole bunch of people I would have never come in contact with, which turned me into a much better person than I could have hoped. And then turned pro in 2012, and it's been kind of up from there.
The roller coaster of professional golf will come to all that as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That progression sounds reasonably typical, but were you a typical sort of high-performance golfer? I know you as a really thoughtful, I've often referred to you as the hippie golf pro. There's not many of you in that way. During that progression, did you feel different? Did you feel you fit with all the other kids? Because at that age, for the most part, it's not a particularly cerebral pursuit, is it? It's a very simplistic, here's the ball, there's the hole, get it in there. For young boys especially, it's who can hit it the furthest and who can hit the longest 7-iron. Were you like that, or were you already thinking differently about the game?
Well, I was always a little bit of an outsider when I was a kid. I never really had much of an ability to fit in that well. I guess it's still true today. But so for me,
a left-leaning golf pro in the US is absolutely not fitting in, my friend.
It's a little bit of a rarity. I've just learned how to communicate with people now in a non-direct way, and now I'm able to have more friends. But I think going through that was, I was a little bit different. But again, the golf for me was the common denominator between me and everyone else. Whether or not people thought I was cool, or whether I thought they were cool, or whether we agreed on things, or whether we were from similar backgrounds. Once we were playing golf, we were still just playing golf. And I think that's a very cool thing about the game. It's like that everywhere in the world. It allows people to relate to each other who may not otherwise relate to each other.
And in fact, You can play 18 holes with someone you've never met before and not realise until the end that you're in fact diametrically opposed with your views on almost everything in the world. And yet,
absolutely.
At golf, none of it matters.
100%. And, if anything, we need more of that nowadays. So I think that the game is good like that. But no, it was fairly typical coming through. I'm extremely competitive, have always been, and it used to really annoy me that I could never beat Daniel Nisbet when we were juniors. He was very clearly better than me, but I was very clearly better than everyone else when we were juniors. So we were kind of separated a little bit in that way, but I could never beat him.
And have you since? We might come to that.
Since we've been a professional, he's had some.
He's had a couple of wins, hasn't he?
Yeah, he's had some wins. He's stayed down in more Australia area and like that. It's not really about things like that, but I would be confident playing him in a money match now and feeling we're on even
the
footing.
Gauntlet's been thrown down. If anybody out there in Thing About Golf Land wants to put up the stake, I'm sure that Daniel and Bryden will be happy to go out.
The match.
The match, that's right. The match 3. Was that difficult for you, that whole period? Teenage years are awkward enough, let alone being an outsider in a high-performance program and sport like golf, which has got all of its own issues as well. And where does that come from? Why are you like that?
That's a really good question. I have no idea. I think that I've always had my own opinions and ways of kind of thinking my way through things. And I guess I just haven't really met many people in my life that have thought about things in a similar way. And when I was younger, I would think that would mean that I shouldn't be around those people. And that has since changed. But when you're young, like you said, when you're a teenager, you don't really understand what's going on. Your body's expanding in all directions and trying to just stay upright, basically. And so when I was, it was, not overly difficult, but I didn't have a great time at school. I didn't have a whole lot of friends and things like that. So golf for me was more of an escape from my teenage years than it was something piling on top of that.
If I understand it correctly, your mum became a federal court judge quite late in life. Was that right?
Well, she's not exactly late in life. She's in her mid-50s now, mid-late 50s, and so she it was 2011, I think, is when she got her, or 2012. Not 100% on that. Sorry, Mum, if you're listening. But it's
Doug
10 years.
And your mum and your dad you've offended already, and we're, 10 minutes in? Beautiful.
It's okay. It normally only takes me a couple of minutes on FaceTime anyway. So I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago that she got onto the bench. Fairly normal for federal court judges. They're normally kind of in their mid-50s. So she was actually maybe on the young side for coming in. And so she was, by all accounts, from people that I know in the legal community who are not her, she was a bit of a breath of fresh air coming into the court, being a younger, liberal-leaning woman. Well, liberal-leaning is maybe a little bit... she's very liberal coming in. I think that was something that was welcomed at the court.
Mm. Was that a thing at the time? Was a big deal made about that? Gender politics is always bubbling just under the surface. Was that a bit of a thing? And what was it like? What sort of things did you learn from her? I feel like what you're describing your mum sounds to me more like what I know of you than perhaps your dad with the maths and everything having an actual answer at the end of it that's quite straightforward in a way.
Yeah, my mum's always been a champion for gender equality, pretty much since I was younger. Gender and racial equality. It's always been a theme running through my life. That it's just never really been a question of mine that there was anything unequal about genders, unequal about different races, different nationalities. It was just... And that's something that I struggled with when I came over to especially to the South, because, I was kind of taught younger that people who thought that people were unequal in some ways were bad people. And that was something I had to get over, that, they're not bad people. Those are just bad opinions. So there is a difference there. Someone can be a good person and have a bad opinion. But I think... my mum's done a lot to champion women in law as well in Melbourne and in Australia more broadly. But she broke a lot of barriers for women in law, and I think that example of breaking barriers has been something that I've kind of looked up to, probably subliminally my entire life. And I think it's always helpful to have someone who is a, quote, high achiever in your family as an example.
Because that's not a small achievement, is it? For international listeners, the federal court's big deal.
It is a big deal.
To be
it is.
A young woman appointed to a federal court bench that's a big deal.
Well, and the things she did as a barrister were also quite important. She was also the first woman to ever run a case in the High Court, and she won
Really? She's in her mid-50s and she was the first woman to run a case in the High Court, first barrister. So, that's madness, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, there's the old school still very much exists in some areas of our community. I'm pretty sure that law is one of those.
Lots of golfers in that community too, as you would know.
There are. Yes. Well, there's a crossover there.
Of course.
So I think that, she did a lot of things like that. She won the President's Award, they call it, something like that. It was basically they award it to the best lawyer of the year type thing. She was the first woman to win that as well. And so she did a lot as a barrister, and she had a very fulfilling career. And now she's moved on to the bench at the federal court. And now that she's been there for 6 or 7 years, she is really starting to come into her own and start to really, change things for the better, I believe. Yeah.
I ask all this because I'm interested in what shapes people and their outlook. And you're an outlier in golf with the way you think. And I think the upbringing that you're explaining is explaining some of that in some ways. Because as you mentioned, you went to Georgia. It's not exactly a hotbed of political, racial and gender equality historically, is it?
It's
part
not,
of the world.
no.
That must have been quite confronting. And then you're the kid from Australia with all the expectations that comes with that. You're not fitting in necessarily, which you're probably not unused to. You've had your whole teenage years not to fit in. But this is going to college is a huge opportunity, first step on a professional career. That's the reality of it. What was that period like, and how did you find it you adjusted? I think you and Jordan Spieth were the same era. And in fact, I think you once told me that early on, most would have suggested you were the more likely to go on and do what Jordan has since done.
Well, in hindsight, Jordan was much better equipped than I was. But at the time, yes, I think there was promise put on. I think the class coming through then, the three of us kind of at the top of the class there were Jordan, myself, and Patrick Cantley. But it was the best decision I ever made in my life to go to school in Georgia. The first 6 months that I was there were, I don't want to say miserable, but it was the same old from when I was in high school. Didn't really have a lot of friends, didn't really get along with anyone. The only person I really got along with was Russell Henley, and that's because he's just as weird as I am. And it was only during the summer that before the summer started, we have all the events, amateur events we play. So like the Northeast Am, the Dogwood, all the US Am, all these events. So we play Southern Am, Porter Cup, all these ones. And all our guys from the team would play them as well, obviously. Before the summer happened, our coach sat me down, Coach Hack, and he goes, you've come in here and you're very opinionated and you're kind of very strong in your opinions, and we respect that, but don't you want to have friends? It's a very Southern kind of, hang on a second, don't you want to be like happy as well as right? Sometimes there's a trade-off there, and in your own mind, not in like, the objective world, but subjectively, there's a bit of a trade-off between being happy and right a lot of the time in our lives. So I think after he sat me down, I sort of took a look at it and I go, oh yeah, maybe I do need to sort of do this. And so over the summer, it's not like I went out of my way, but I was a lot more forgiving of other people's different cultural upbringings than what I had, and started to look at beyond what a person said sometimes to what they were like in general. And that was a huge step for me growing up. And when we came back in the fall, I was getting along great I was going to play holes with Hudson, just me and him, and I was laughing with Harry about stuff that I never thought I'd laugh about. And I had these friends, and I've still got them, haven't spoken to them in a while, but we could pick up right where we left off, So then over the next year, where we really made a run at the national championship, we were a team, and I was friends with people that I never thought I would be friends with, and that was amazing.
We all think we're right, don't we? It's
Absolutely.
a human trait. Otherwise, we wouldn't think the things we do. Nobody says to themselves, I'm going to think the wrong thing here. That would be madness. But we live in a world that's very divisive now. We know politically in particular, there seems to be either black or white. They're the only two options. And the reality of humanity is that shades of grey are the majority of stuff. This is a golf podcast. What's all that got to do with golf? How does that impact golf? Does it help? Does it hurt? I said at the outset that being thoughtful, and I've encountered this in a few. Meg McLaren is one. She's very bright. I'm not sure ultimately it's great for golfers to be as thoughtful and deep thinking. I think you can tie yourself in knots. What does all that do for you, all that's happening off course, for your actual golf? Were you achieving at Georgia? Were you doing what?
I did pretty well my first semester. I won SEC Southeastern Conference for the Australians listening. I won SEC Freshman of the Year, having only played half a season. So I was doing all right early. But then it kind of set in after that fall, after that first summer, where I got really lost. I didn't really know what I was doing. Didn't have a good handle on how I was swinging the club, what I was trying to do with my swing, and it got really, really bad, to the point where I didn't know what I was doing, felt completely lost. And
so what happens there, Bryden? How does that happen? Is that a physical thing or a mental thing? You think it has to be mental. You've got there with a golf swing that, well, it's probably good enough to compete on most tours around the world if you're at the number one school in America and you're doing well. You're a good enough player to compete, at a world-class level. What happens? How does that fall apart?
Well, I see it as like a type of cycle between physical and mental. I think it can start as something physical or mental, but it alternates. So if you have something mental pop up that you can't get over, say maybe you're not old enough to figure out that you need to get over it, that could manifest itself as something physical. And then that physical, whatever it is, a miss to the right, a constant miss to the right, a constant miss to the left, a chunking of wedge shots, whatever it is, a missing of 2 or 3 footers, something like that. If it gets in there and you're not strong enough mentally to realize that it has just come out of nowhere, it can reinforce that mental block that you have. And then it goes round and round and round and round. And it's happened to me multiple times with different parts of my game where you get completely tied in a knot and you don't really know what to do. I was at that point, that would have been the mid part of the spring. So that would have been sort of February, March in 2011, where I didn't have any clue how to hit the ball on the planet. And I was getting by, not really, with my short game and my perseverance, I guess, trait that I sort of tend to have.
Had this happened to you before?
No.
At any other point in your sort of amateur career to that point?
No, it hadn't. But I'd always been coddled by coaches. So I'd always had someone there to reach out to if something like this did start happening, or someone that I could reach out to that could tell me that it was okay, that it was going to be fine, that it was... but this was the first time that it was on me. And I was kind of on my own because, my swing coach at the time was in Australia and I was in Athens, Georgia. So I was completely lost then. It was only when the coaches at Georgia stepped in at the national championship after I shot 81 in the first round at Caston Creek, which is Oklahoma State's home golf course, which is pretty easy to do. It's very, very tight, and it's jungle on both sides. Lots of guys have big scores around that golf course, but for me, I was just on the range, and I'm thinking, what do I do? And one of the coaches comes down, and he says, all right, all we're going to do is focus on your rhythm and trust that your golf swing is good enough to hit decent shots, and go from there. And that was what carried me through into, I think I shot 1 under in the second round, which was big for our team, and won my matches in the match play section. And then I won the British Amateur the next week. But it's kind of like that was a big lesson for me. in that it doesn't have to be perfect, but it hasn't stopped me from falling back into that same trap in other parts of my game since. Not to mention the same trap with my swing as well. It's only been in the last 6 months that I've actually feel like I've transcended all of that crap.
Right. Terrific timing, just in time for World Golf to stop completely.
Absolutely, right?
You have absolutely nowhere to test it and achieve. Within all of that, how much identity is wrapped up in golf at the level that you play at? So by that, when that happens to you, you shoot 81, what does that do to you in reverse away from the course? So when you're struggling away from the course, how does it affect your golf? But when your golf suddenly goes south, does that have personal psychological impacts? I would imagine at that age you've got an awful lot invested in the numbers that you shoot.
Yeah, I think for a long time, golf was everything for me. It was kind of how I identified, and so yeah, I would take that stuff very hard. It was something that I had to pick myself up pretty much every morning when it was difficult. Something that is not difficult on the world scale of difficulties that people have to deal with.
But it's a real first world problem, isn't it? My elite golf game is not as sharp as it was last week.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about that 2011 British Amateur. You said it came the week after a very tumultuous time by the sound of it at that tournament. 81 in the first round, 1 under the second round, finding something. What do you remember about that week?
I remember a lot about that week. It was a testament to the fact that you need luck to win golf tournaments. I came in thinking that I was playing okay, is enjoying being in the UK. It's my favourite place to play golf, basically. It's a great part of the world. They're in Lancashire. Hillside, beautiful golf course. Second course was Hesketh, also a good golf course. And, you know, I played... Where did I play? I played pretty well in the first round. Not that well. I think I was still maybe a little jet-lagged. And second round, I played really nicely around Hillside and shot 2 under to qualify for the match play easily. It's my third British Amateur.
Qualifying and then match play.
And then match play, yep. So 64 guys. 64 guys. And I had played pretty well. I think I qualified somewhere in the middle. And my first round went to the 19th hole, where my opponent missed about a 2-foot putt on the 19th hole to keep it going. And then we halved the 20th, and then I holed like a 20-footer to win on the 21st.
Wow.
So it could have been all over right then.
Sliding doors, isn't it?
Yeah, it's again, that's kind of the thing of golf. Like it all makes sense in retrospect, but never makes sense when it's happening. And from there, I found a little rhythm with my putter, and I was hitting the ball okay, sort of in play, enough that around a links golf course where it's hard to be a perfectly precision ball striker, that I could beat guys with my putter. And I just stayed very confident and calm, and I remember winning the semi-final match 2-1, I think, or 3-2, can't remember, and going to the final. And I remember I topped it off the first tee of the final, tried to hit like a flighted hybrid down the first hole and hit the top half of the ball and bounded down the fairway about 180 yards and hit it up by the green, 2-putted from the edge for par for a half. And I remember it being a real slog. You know, the last round was 36-hole final. I was never more than 2 up, and I was never down. So we were always around, me and Mikey Stewart, who I played against. We were always pretty evenly matched. No one ever got any real momentum. We were both kind of scrapping it around. I think we both brought our B- games that day, but I think I brought my A putting game. He brought his B+ putting game, and that was really the difference. I remember vividly on the 15th hole, little dogleg left around a sand dune, hitting a 6-iron at the flag, which was a rare occurrence that week, to about 30 feet just short. Mikey was 3 feet in front of me. So I'm putting first. One of those classic match play situations that, having grown up in Australia and played pennant, state team, all kinds of stuff, you recognize them. It's kind of this feeling that, well, if I make this, he's going to miss his. If I miss this, he's going to make his. It just seems like those are the only two options, which of course they're not.
No, but you're in the bubble at that stage, aren't you?
At some point you can feel these things, and you're very surprised by any other occurrence. And I rolled this 30-footer straight in the heart, and I remember jumping up in the air and fist pumping to go 3 up with 3 to play. And I couldn't believe it. And then the next hole was long par 3 that I'd hit it left every day. And we remember we'd been there for about a week and a half. So every day I'd hit it left of this green. And left is the only place you can't hit it. So I aimed basically 40 yards right of the green. Tried to hit this big draw in there and hit it right of the green. Chipped up. Mikey missed his 20-footer, which he actually hit a great shot in there. And then I hold less 3-footer. I remember putting the ball down and not lining it up properly, and then about to start my routine and thinking, well, it's to win the British Am. You could probably line this one up properly. So I went down and relined it up, hold it. And sitting on the cart going back to the clubhouse, I was just thinking to myself, what just happened? I think if there was an amateur tournament that I wanted to win, it was that. Just like I think if there's a professional event I want to win, it wants to be the Open for me. Yeah, it's a very surreal experience. And one of my good friends at the time, Fraser Fotheringham, had driven down from northern Scotland to watch me. I'd been with him before the event started up there. And so then we drove 6.5 hours in separate cars back up to northern Scotland, and we got up there and I think drank one of the bars out of their pints. And it's just a really cool experience.
So I was introduced to a saying last week, which I'd never heard before, but which makes a lot of sense, and it might make sense to you in this situation. It's better to have travelled well than have landed. Winning the British Amateur, you land, don't you? This is kind of what happened to Javal. He landed. The famous story of being on the jet on the way back after the 2001 Open win and thinking to himself, was this it? We've had similar stories. Rory McIlroy spoke on a podcast the other week about, I think it was winning the Mullingar, which is a big event in Ireland at 16, driving home with his dad in the car in tears, wanting to give the game away, having just won a big event. Does any of that gel with you? Does that make sense in hindsight?
Well, I feel a theme developing because it comes back to one of those things. It's just, you realize after you win something like that, and luckily I had the opportunity to win some big amateur events and some professional events. And it's funny how fleeting the feeling of winning is. You realize that when you look back, the winning is great. The winning moment is burned into your memory, and it's a fantastic thing to reflect on. But what you actually enjoy is the fight to get there. And I think that's another thing that parallels life, is that, we go through life looking for the next thing that we can get that will then make us happy. And then we realize that it's not true because there's something else waiting on the other side.
It's a journey, not a destination, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think that, those who are more introspective in golf can realize that and then derive a lot of joy from just playing tournament golf, which also helps you play better tournament golf. Unrelated, of course, it's just an extra bonus, because the real joy that you get from it is actually from going through the process of competing. And for me now, enjoying the feelings of nerves and, concern and stress and relief, all kinds of emotions that flow through you. I'm getting chills now just thinking about it. That's the great part. Winning is great. It's the best. That's the goal. Winning is the mountaintop that you're trying to climb. But, if you're just blanking out the entire climb, you've missed out on so much, and you'll get up there and realize that there's another peak to climb somewhere else. I think that's one of the reasons why guys suffer even after winning big events, I think that there's an opportunity for them to really learn something from that, and I hope that they do, because there's a lot to be learned from the game, and that's one of the great things that you can learn.
And that's true at every level, whether it be a B grade tournament at your own home club,
absolutely,
or the Open or the Masters or on the bigger stages. One of the cruelest things about golf is that it's very binary. You either shoot the number or you don't.
Mm.
But it's not a game, clearly for you and for many, that can be approached with a black and white, this is the right and this is the wrong way. Mm-hmm. Once you get to a certain level, where you were at the end of 2016, it can be extremely dangerous to do the Costanza, the opposite of everything that I think is what I should do. Was that a difficult decision to make? It's gone wrong for a lot of people, and it's gone right for some people too. We know that. Mm-hmm. So what goes into making that decision? Because you're talking about something that's really important to you personally and professionally.
Yes.
It's a frightening place to be, isn't it?
Obviously want to try avoiding throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But I think I may have a little bit. But I don't really know. But again, I think the only way that you can really fix a problem is to go through it with a fine-tooth comb. And I've gone through my game from top to bottom and side to side with a fine-tooth comb to get to a point where it felt workable and simple in every area of the game, because I knew that there was an understanding out there that was simultaneously deep and complete and also simple. And it exists, for those listening who are wondering if it does. It absolutely exists. The best players got there. The best players knew everything about what they were doing. But they didn't think about everything they were doing while they were doing it. That's the difference. That's what it is. That's golfing nirvana. That's what you're trying to achieve, is to know.
Zone, isn't it? You just do.
Yeah, well, I mean, they still understand. They're still operating the machine. They're just not. They're operating it from one or two levers, not all 50,000 of them.
Yeah, at any given time. So I guess that begs the question. At every point along the journey, you always think you're doing the right thing, don't you?
Absolutely.
You have to. Otherwise, the journey sort of stops. So then the question becomes, how do you know this time? You're clearly quite confident. Something's obviously changed in the last 6 months. You've referenced the last 6 months 2 or 3 times now. Mm-hmm. So clearly something's sort of changed in there. What is that? And how do you both have complete confidence that you're now right and also understand that there may require some further changes down the track, that's quite possible? How do you do that? That's a neat trick, isn't it, mentally?
Yeah, well, so again, people that know me won't be surprised by this, but I've always believed that the way to approach anything is with 100% confidence in what you think you know, mm-hmm. until you're proven otherwise. Then to take that on board and then be 100% confident in what you know now that someone has shown you how you're wrong about something. But the challenge...
Just being flaky, Bryden? Isn't that flip-flopping politically? Isn't that what flip-floppers do?
I mean, yes, and somehow that's a bad thing. Yet we encourage evolution in people's personas. You don't get to hold on to your beliefs forever. It's not something that you get to keep. And I think if you try and hold on to that, then you're depriving yourself of growth. I think you have to believe in what you're doing, but you have to be open to being wrong with enough evidence. And so that's exactly where I am now. I have 100% confidence in what I'm doing, and I've been here before. But I will approach everything that I do with this level of confidence until it's right or right enough. And so there's a chance that what I'm doing is wrong, but I'm experiencing things now that I haven't experienced in the past. That's what gives me confidence. Because
so I guess even if it's wrong, you'll have learnt something.
100, yeah, absolutely. I've learned something from every time I've been wrong. I've picked up something from every time I've been 100% confident in what I think I know and then proven to be wrong, even if it's just humility, I've learned something from it every single time.
Aren't you unnecessarily complicating something that you had already mastered? Golf ultimately is just the physical act of taking a club, swinging it, hitting the ball to where you want, and then hitting it to where you want again, and then hitting it in the hole. Aren't you unnecessarily overcomplicating that in this sort of quest? Can't you golf and find yourself as a better person, but just keep hitting the ball where you want it and win golf tournaments along the way? Why can't they just be separate? That's
a really good question. In my mind, they're never separate because you're the same person who's doing both of those things. And if you're depriving yourself the opportunity to grow while you're on the golf course, then the rest of your life is going to suffer. I have been accused of overcomplicating things my entire life.
I'm sure you've got a very complex answer to that too.
Personally, I think it's because I am a perfectionist who is incredibly competitive. So I don't like to settle for things that are half-baked. And so I have trouble accepting things that are half-baked, because when someone says to me, for all the people out there that say that you overcomplicate things, there's also people that challenge your understanding on things. And it irks me when I can't explain what I'm doing. When someone smarter than me says, why do you do that? And the only answer I've got is because I do.
I'm also reminded of something Jeff Ogilvy said, and this will make sense to you, I guess, and you might be able to expand on it a bit. Everybody's always trying to copy the best, but the best never copy anybody. Tiger did it his way and has sparked a generation of players, many of them trying to do it Tiger's way. Mm-hmm. That can't work, can it? Maybe that's the lesson you've learned in some ways?
Yeah, I mean, and Jeff's 100% right. The best people by definition are the ones who have figured out how to do it their way the best. So if anything you're trying to copy for the best players, it should be to find your own way and do that the best, not do it their way.
The game's changed an awful lot in a lot of ways. You mentioned technology. You mentioned you had some strong opinions. So let's just get a thumbnail sketch of some of your thoughts about technology and its impacts on the game. And then we might break down some of that stuff as to why it might be important, more broadly than just the first world golf's inner gazings of why it's changed by maybe why the game's less or more interesting.
Well, firstly, I would actually disagree with the idea that science is somehow now more apparent in golf than it was 80 years ago. It's not. The science is the same. The actual science of the golf swing, things that you can't see, that you can only feel, things like gravity and centrifugal force and the forces going through a club shaft and through a club head, through someone's hands, through the ground, are all the same. Mm-hmm. The science that I think is the term now we give to sports science around physiology and how a swing looks on camera and performs on TrackMan, that stuff has developed. But that doesn't, like I said, it doesn't change any of the actual physical, like physics science that happens in a golf swing. So there was definitely more of an art involved when the golf balls span more, when you had Bellata balls. The art of controlling your irons and shaping your tee shots, although nowhere near as far as now, is definitely changed. So the artistic form of ball striking has, slowly disintegrated. And that is due to technology. That is due to the consumerizing, that's not a word, but of technology. The tailoring of technology to the average golfer, not to the professional golfer, and professional golfers not realizing that they are different sports, professional golf and
recreational golf, hobby golf. What I do.
Those are different sports. They are as different as footy and cricket. So it makes no sense to me why people would use the same technology across those things. So I'll start with the fact that golf swings now are heralded as being better than they were, 50 years ago in the 70s. They may look nicer on a 2D camera, but they are certainly not better. The best swings are the same. The guys doing it the best are still doing it the best in the same ways. Technology has gotten, have gotten lighter, have gotten more upright. Upright lie angles were not a thing until Ping came along and decided to fix the average golfer Rod Morri's slice on the range by giving him a club that was 4 degrees more upright than the one that he was using. Mm-hmm. That's a quick fix to sell a set of clubs for $1,000 there on the range. That's the capitalization of the golf technology industry.
That's a golf business. It's not golf.
That's the golf business. That's right. Right. Which I fully support, by the way. I totally support.
It's paying your rent or mortgage of the place wherever I don't know whether you're renting or buying, but that's paying it.
The golf equipment companies play a very important part in allowing people to enjoy the game easier. Mm-hmm. That's a very important part of our game, because as much as I love professional golf and think that it is really golf in its truest form, it doesn't exist without recreational golf. So they are symbiotic in that way. So while that plays a really important part in getting your average golfers interested in the game, it has an actual corrosive effect on the professional game. And by corrosive, I mean that there are players on tour who are on tour because of equipment. They don't have the skill set that would have been required to play on tour with the equipment 50 years ago. Not to say that they couldn't develop that skill set, but right now they don't have it because the equipment doesn't require them to. So swings have changed to become more upright and faster, but not really. Players are not more athletic than they were 50 years ago. That's not a thing. Players are in probably better shape than they were 50 years ago. Guys are maybe thinner and they spend more time on their Peloton. But Jack Nicklaus still moved a club north of 120 miles an hour, and those clubs were heavier. Ben Hogan, I don't know if you've ever seen him swing it on video, but it's not like he's just smoothing it down the fairway. He was ripping it, moving it very, very fast. It doesn't take athleticism to move a club fast if you do it correctly. What is happening simultaneously is because equipment is getting lighter and more upright, players' swings are changing to fit that. And what that's doing is actually causing more problems than what it's solving, because players are getting injured from swinging golf clubs. That was not a thing. Ben Hogan, Sam Snead, Bobby Jones, Jack Nicklaus.
Nicklaus never had an injury, did he?
These guys, up until the mid-80s, mid-90s, no one got injured from swinging a golf club because it wasn't a thing. It's not an injury thing. It's not something that should give you an injury if you do it correctly. And if you do it incorrectly, you'll get feedback on that and you'll get an injury. Whereas now, equipment is allowing so many different swings to function on tour that guys are getting injured. And they think that it's somehow connected to the physiology, but it's not. It's connected to their golf swings. If I gave you something heavy and I asked you to swing it as fast as you could, your response would be to lift that thing up as high as you could to swing it fast, with a ceiling being on about hip height. You'd be able to move that really fast at about parallel to the ground. Granted, if you could hold it up. Now, if I gave you that thing and told you to swing it in what would be a really upright golf motion and try and go fast, which one are you going to get injured doing? You've got, now I know a lot about the physiology and stuff. I'm big into the gym and all that, but I'm not delusional thinking that that is what's preventing my injuries. It's my golf swing. So if you're going to swing upright, you're going to get all kinds of funky external and internal rotations of your shoulder and your wrist. You're going to get all kinds of QL, which is your lower back side bending and stabilizing injuries. All these things don't happen to people who play T-ball, because T-ball is parallel to the ground. That's how our bodies are designed to swing things fast. So equipment has created this culture of getting injured from swinging a golf club. And then around that has the sports science thing has sprung up to solve the problem that doesn't need to exist.
We'll make it strong enough so it doesn't break and we can continue to use it in the incorrect way.
Yes.
I guess fundamentally as a concept, every generation has just answered the questions that have been asked of them, haven't they? That's essentially that's what sport is. And as golf has evolved and different technology, the questions have changed. The intent, you can understand the fascination with this, and we all have it. We all want to hit the ball as far as we possibly can. There's something extremely satisfying about that. The difference with golf, and that's fine in AFL, if people learn to kick at 100 metres then that's fantastic. But in golf, it fundamentally changes the challenge of the arm wrestle between the course and the player. It seems that we have a focus in the modern era only on the player, that the player is the only and the most important aspect of golf, when in fact the golf course and golf courses generally have an equal role to play. Does that make sense, what I'm saying there? And that if you give too much power is the wrong word. If the balance shifts too much in favour of the player, the game as a whole is diminished because the course no longer can keep up and make the contest interesting.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's again another difference between recreational golf and professional golf, is that for the most part, recreational golfers are playing against themselves and the golf course. Mm-hmm. And whereas professional golfers are playing against each other on the golf course. So the golf course is what's asking the questions, and then the professional golf event is who can answer those questions the best over 4 rounds. So when you have equipment changing things so that golf courses become obsolete, those competitions become boring because the players are getting asked the same question every week. So the same guys are winning every week. So
that's marketable though, isn't it, Bryden? If you're the PGA Tour, isn't that what you want? You find the players that are marketable and you manipulate things so that they continue to win. And that way, what you've got yourself is a lovely little marketable sport where the people that are popular sort of win. That's maybe putting something more nefarious on the PGA Tour than in reality. But I know you've sort of suggested this before, that the way golf courses are being set up, particularly around, is changing to accommodate a certain style of player. And the reasons for that might be that that certain style of player is popular with the public and marketable. Is that true?
I would agree. I think that the PGA Tour has made a decision that the way that they're going to get non-golf fans interested in the PGA Tour is with driving distance. This guy hit it 370. This guy hit it 360. Failing to mention that it was in Arizona and it was downwind because it doesn't sound as, or it was in Utah where it's 10,000 feet above sea level. So there has been a conscious decision along the lines somewhere, and that has precipitated a negative effect on the game because it's turned into, it's edging closer and closer to a long drive contest than it is a true test of the game. Just because, like I said, players are getting asked only a few questions every round, not to oversimplify it, but they're getting asked the question, who can hit it the furthest, who can putt the best, and who can hit the most greens in regulation from, which is easier the further that you hit it.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically what guys are being asked. I think you could see that with the fact that there's not really anyone at the top level of the game at the moment who's considered a short game specialist.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when there was lots of guys. Luke Donald made it to number one in the world, basically being the best bunker player in the world.
Yep.
That doesn't really exist anymore. And I think that's also a very good question. Because it's not the true essence of the game. And again, I sound a little bit like a traditionalist, and some people will probably rightfully say that I should evolve and move on from what should be the idea of what traditional golf is. But I'm just of the belief that you have 14 clubs in your bag for a reason. You shouldn't only use 7 of them. Our game is supposed to be in different conditions, on different conditions. Mm-hmm. It's not supposed to be easy and predictable. I feel like that goes against the grain of what the game actually is. So I don't think it's too much to ask that the professional sport also represents that. And I think that it's turned into a little bit of a cookie cutter situation in the US, not with the majors. The Masters is the Masters. They do a very good job of maintaining the spirit of their tournament. The Open does the same thing. The PGA has the best field in golf. And the US Open always keeps us interested with their course selections and course setups. I think that's part of the reason why they get so many complaints from players, is because it's consistently very different from what they're used to on the PGA Tour. And while sometimes if the greens at Shinnecock are rolling 17 and guys can't keep it on the green, that might not be a good thing. But I don't think it's a bad thing for the game to have guys having to answer different questions than what they normally have to.
It's just a thing, isn't it? It's us that attaches labels about good and bad. I agree with most of what you say. To me, the problems are that the game will ultimately cannibalise itself at the professional level if they're not careful. This drive to attract non-golfers to watch professional golf has the cart before the horse, in my mind. The reality of golf spectating is that, for the most part, it's only those of us who play who are interested in watching others play. There's a couple of times a year where that's not true. The Masters, the Open, and the Ryder Cup are probably the 3 events that really draw big numbers from outside of golf. Mm-hmm. Aside from that, it's people who play. And if you start trying to focus on people who don't play, it's an interesting theory. Adrian Lowe, who I co-host a different podcast with, he's posited this notion that the PGA Tour seem to be trying to make the game look more like a video game at the top level. And there's some truth with grids on the fairways and the top tracer, and there's some, there's a lot of good stuff in all of that, which makes it interesting. My camera's, of course, just dropped out, so you can't see me. I'm making some fabulous hand gestures here, so that's a real shame. And you can sort of see that, can't you? This notion that it almost becomes a virtual world where you don't need to play golf. But to me, if you're going to appreciate golf, professional golf, watching golf, you need to understand just how hard it is. And the only way to understand how hard it is to have a go at it yourself and realise it's extraordinarily humiliating and emasculating on a daily basis. The game just beats you down.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's profit maximization. That's what it is. They've basically run out of areas to profit from inside of the game, so they're starting to look more outside of the game to continue to grow the purses beyond 8 million. Do the purses need to be beyond 8 million is a conversation we can have. Probably not. They should probably keep up with inflation, where $1.8 million isn't enough to pay your mortgage. If we ever get to that point, they should probably
White
go
doesn't
up.
want to give slow play penalties, mate, because somebody might lose some money that they were going to spend on a renovation or an extension to the house.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, how much is enough is kind of a interesting question to ask.
The bigger question is that Corbyn got hammered for suggesting that nobody needs to be a billionaire, and he got hammered by professional golfers before the UK election.
Yeah. I mean, professional golf is interesting. It's a little different in my mind to the subject of whether or not billionaires should exist, because someone like Jeff Bezos, who contributes something what a lot of people would consider irreplaceable to society, he probably deserves to be successful because he's created something amazing that we all use and benefit from every day. Maybe not everyone in Australia, but certainly everyone in the US. That's different from a professional golfer claiming that they should make 1.9 million instead of 1.8 million for.
In fact, what they're actually saying, bro, is there shouldn't be a cap. The general thing of that is that why would you say it should be 1 point? It should be whatever the market will bear.
I completely agree. I'm very free market oriented in that thing. It should be worth whatever it's bringing in. Now, the question that the PGA Tour is asking, I believe, is that, well, how do we bring more in? How do we expand the game to non-golf fans who are going to watch things on TV and show up and buy beers? I also have nothing wrong with the odd tournament like the Waste Management in Phoenix being a party tournament.
Disagree on something.
I have nothing wrong with an event having a characteristic as a party event. Mm-hmm. I have a problem with a tour being characteristic as a party tour. But events are allowed to have their own character. That's part of the fun. Players can choose to play or not choose to play. But players can't choose to play the PGA Tour or not if the whole game is going that way. So I think they should really let the game still maintain its integrity, but I just don't think that viewpoint has much of a weight in the United States, which is disappointing because it certainly used to.
They're interesting times, aren't they?
All the great golf courses, all the great golfers, all had this, your Ben Hogan, your Sam Snead, Jack Nicklaus, Tom Watson, Arnold Palmer, had this, you could tell when you hear them speak, they had this deep connection to the game that they didn't feel like was worth jeopardizing with commercialization.
Interesting times for the game, aren't they? These are interesting times across the board.
They sure are.
Of all the sports, golf is the one I think that has more interesting sort of offshoots to deal with that are much more, as you say, kind of mirror life and society more generally. Lots of questions. What are the answers? What do we do about? Let's just take distance. If we both here accept the notion that the ball goes too far, what do we do about it? Because it only goes too far for you. How far do you hit it?
I think my stats say my driving average is around 300 yards.
So you're short. That's why you're complaining. You can't hit at 350.
That's right.
Of course you're not.
Short. That's right.
300 is pretty average these days, isn't it? About 300.
I don't hit it long. I hit it. I always tell people that I'm in the bottom of the top third of driving distance. Because I don't hit it short, but I don't hit it long either.
You're long enough to compete.
Long enough to compete. Long enough that the bunkers that are at 280 yards are not a problem for me.
Right.
So,
think about that for a moment, people. 280 yards, 250 metres. There's a bunker out there at that distance, and you tee up on a Saturday morning, and if you're Bryden, you don't even think about it. It's a carry hazard. You just carry it over that.
Straight over it.
Yeah.
Personally, I think the ball should come back a little bit. I think that technology has gotten a little bit out of control for the professionals.
Right. So not for everybody or just for you?
No, just for the professionals.
Right. So a bifurcated game, two sets of equipment rules.
We already play a bifurcated game.
Oh, I know that.
The game is very, very different. The game shifts from being 90% physical in the recreational game to 90% mental when you play the professional game. That, for me, is enough of a transformation that it's a different sport altogether. So I don't see a problem. As I've stated earlier, I'm very open to being proven wrong on this. I would love for the people involved in the golf industry to explain to me why a professional golf ball would be detrimental to the golfing industry. I'd love to hear it, anyone. But I don't know. I can't see the answer. My personal opinion that I give to people that ask me is that I think we should do what tennis does. I think we should have a standardized golf ball. I think we should have it change depending on the tour or the event that you're playing in. That way that the manufacturers can still manufacture different balls.
Aren't you fundamentally changing the nature of the game if you do that, though? Players have always been free to choose the equipment that suits them best, and I think that's an important facet of the game. To me, if you just switch the parameters of the ball, which might be more difficult than it sounds necessarily, but I think we all agree, a ball that's spun more, if you could introduce a minimum spin rate for the professional tours and change the materials to actually decrease the distance the ball can go overall, feels like you would solve a lot of the problems without meddling with the fundamental challenges of the game that have been in existence for its entire professional existence. Mm-hmm. To me, that seems the...
You could also make the ball bigger as well. They did that before.
Lighter.
Yeah.
Take a bit of weight off it.
Yep. I think just making the ball slightly bigger and keeping if it was a decent amount bigger, 5% bigger, and the hole was the same size, that would also have a secondary effect on putting.
If you want to hear some complaining, give that a crack, Bryden. In fact, walk into a clubhouse at a professional event and suggest that. See how you go. You'll be eating alone, my friend, if you weren't already.
Oh, trust me, absolutely. I'm very aware of how this stuff is received by my fellow.
But you're not alone, though, are you?
I'm not. I'm maybe alone in current competitors, but I think a lot of ex-competitors, at least guys who aren't competing at the high level anymore, who were there in the past, I think those are the guys with the biggest voices.
Tiger's he's been saying it for more than a decade that he thinks distance is an issue. So
yeah, and it is an issue, and the fact that Tiger is saying something, definitely means a lot. He's been saying more recently when he's got less to lose.
Yeah.
He wasn't exactly vocal about it when he first got on tour in the late 90s, early 2000s.
He wasn't vocal in 2000 when Nike gave him the new ball that changed the game. He wasn't too vocal about it then. We know that. But
yeah, and I mean, I think we're all subject to changing circumstances, changing our opinions. I don't think that, we can claim exemption from that. But, I mean, I think what you need to do is make hitting driver a risk again. It's not a risk at the moment. Crowds used to go, ooh, when someone pulled out a driver because they were taking a risk by hitting driver. I think that needs to come back into the game. I think the art of the long iron needs to come back into the game because then it really is still golf. If it was up to me and I got to choose the rules, I would take the same approach that the Major League Baseball took when they saw that the aluminum for the Americans listening, bats started to come in, and they looked at it and they said, we're not too keen on having to rebuild our stadiums every 5 years. So what we're going to do is we're going to make these bats illegal, and bats must be made of wood.
Would have been nice had we shut the door on that side of technology in golf to have the same point in
woods be wood and irons be iron and shafts be steel. That would be a very clean way to change a lot of things. But the ball makes a big difference. Yeah. So the ball is really where the crux is.
Well, yeah, it's the most obvious solution, isn't it? Because it's all encompassing, and if you start changing clubs and
it's also
changing rules,
it's also the most impactful. I have a set of persimmons and Ballada balls in my car that I play with on a regular occasion.
Good on you!
And because, like I said, it is the true essence of the game. And
it's more interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the better a player you are, the more interesting it is.
It is.
And the bigger the gap between how interesting it is and how modern golf.
I think you can control your irons better with Ballada balls and blades. I use blades now, but even with the old ones that I have. Now the difference is that I hit it 50 yards shorter with the driver. But I don't hit. If I hit the persimmon wood with my ball that I use now, the Titleist Pro V1, little plug there for Titleist. It's not 50 yards. It's more like 20. So the ball is where you make the biggest impact, because the equipment can be made of wood and steel, but the balls will still go very far. So I think it's a important juncture to take the ball in. I don't agree with the guys who say that shortening the ball would just still put the emphasis on the long players, because the long players would lose more if it was a percentage. So if a ball goes 10% shorter, someone who hits it further loses more. Someone who's also hits it shorter is also used to hitting mid and long irons into par fours, where someone who hits it longer is not. So there's a skill rebalancing there. If distances dropped back 10%, greens in regulation numbers would drop, which would put more emphasis back on short game, which again, the players that have relied on length and greens in regulation would have to re-up their skill set around the greens. So when Brooks puts it as simple as the long players will still be long, it won't make a difference, it's more complicated than that. He would have to chip more. He's still good around the greens, but he's not as good around the greens as Luke Donald is. So if the game started to put emphasis back on around the greens just a little bit, Luke Donald would be slightly at an advantage when it got inside of 30 yards. So that would balance things out.
Long players have always and should be rewarded. If you can hit it long and where you're looking, you should have an advantage over those who can't hit it as far where they're looking. We don't want to take that out. But the whole thing about distance is that it's relative. There was a time not that long ago when 280 was long yards. That was just in the 80s and 90s. That was a long hit, 280 yards. And the players who hit it 280 had that advantage. Now long is 330. You're at 300 yards, 270 metres, and you're average. Literally average.
Well, that's right.
Has that changed anything about the game?
And like you said, it's all relative. So it doesn't really matter that I hit it 300 yards now with modern equipment. What matters is that I'm playing the same courses that they were playing 15 years ago.
Yeah, that's what exactly
matters.
Right.
So like even though my driving distance has increased by 10%, the golf courses are not 10% longer.
And nor should they be. On a planet of finite resources, golf as a game cannot make a case that we need more space to play.
Absolutely.
Because we've got technology that allows it. The madness of that argument is obvious.
That's the actual problem. The actual problem is that you don't have the space to continue to expand the golf courses to make the game the same as it was, to have the courses keep up with the expanse in equipment. That's the only disconnect that matters. So it's not really about equipment being great and all this kind of stuff. It's really just about the relativity between the equipment and the courses, that it changes the challenge of the game from what it's always been.
And the nature of the competition. Is it possible, Bryden, that we're just old, you, me, Clayton, Huggan, Shackelford, that we're just old and we liked a certain sort of golf because it's what we grew up with, and that, in fact, there's a kid out there who's 15 who can't believe that you'd suggest golf should be anything but what it is now? And that for him, when he gets to our age, he's going to be telling young people, when Brooks and Tiger and Rory were the best players in the day, the game was better.
I mean, I'm sure that will be a conversation. Ideally, there's a plateau, just like there was from the 50s to the 80s. For 30 years, their equipment didn't really change. Golf ball manufacturing got a little bit better so that more golf balls came out round. That was about the large
Pros
jump.
used to carry a ring, didn't they? And they would get the new balls from there and they'd put them through the ring and they'd dispense with the ones that weren't
and
quite round.
a lot of pros, including myself, also float balls in salt water to make sure that they are round.
Isn't Bryson the only one that does that? I know he does it.
There are guys. Hogan did it as well. Lots of people have done it. I do it as well. It's a testament, again, a second plug for Titleist here. It's a testament to their manufacturing because I haven't found one yet that isn't round.
Wow.
So, granted, I've only been doing it a month, but still. With the old balls, it was more like 2/3 were round.
Yeah.
So it would make a real difference. I had an experience playing with persimmons and balladas the other week where I was hitting a ball and thinking that didn't feel right with that swing. Ball was certainly not round. So I grabbed a round one and started hitting good shots. So for 30 years there, equipment was fairly standardized. So you could compare someone like Jack Nicklaus to Ben Hogan. The comparison is irrelevant now. You can barely compare guys now to Tiger in 2000. And that's accelerating, and there is a point at where it will break. So there's a point at where it becomes ridiculous, and people just start saying, well, are we playing golf anymore? Is this still golf?
Does it stop being entertaining? Professional golf is entertainment, ultimately, and when it becomes less entertaining, and that's the danger, then it'd be like making a movie that was less interesting than it could be deliberately. There's no point in doing that. So that's the question, and that's the argument.
The same move happens in the game from 20 years ago to now, where the emphasis becomes purely on basically on driving and a putting contest. People will lose interest in the game because they'll stop seeing the variability in the game, which is what makes it interesting.
Yeah. The one bright spot on the horizon I think that we're seeing is there was a period there during that 80s and 90s in particular where we probably lost the interesting characters in the game in the way they swung the club and played the game. Swings became quite formulaic. Adam Scott, Charles Schwartzel, these classic golf swings, which are fantastic and wonderful to watch, but we really saw a production line of sort of golf swings. We're seeing something move away from that now, aren't we? Matthew Wolff is the obvious standout, different kind of golf swing, but we're moving. Ironically, TrackMan is freeing players up to move in different ways as long as they get back to that impact point with the right numbers. There's less emphasis on positions in the swing and more emphasis on the impact, as I understand it, at the level that you sort of play it. So that might be interesting. But if it becomes less entertaining, then it's ultimately been silly to go down that path.
And it's not a good sign that just because someone has a funky swing, that's what makes it interesting.
True.
Even though players had, quote, funky swings, people say Arnold Palmer had a funky swing. He didn't have a funky swing. He had a funky follow-through. He had a very, very functional swing. His swing was just as functional as Jack Nicklaus's or Ben Hogan's or Sam Snead's. The functionality was the same because their equipment was standardized, so there was only really one way to hit the ball the way that they hit the ball. And there were just different ways of getting there. That's what you were seeing with those players. The difference is now is that there are lots of different ways to get there in the short term. But I think the injury rate in players is proving that it's not a long-term solution.
What's your overall take on the game? What's your outlook? Promising, optimistic, bleak?
I think that like globalization is good for our game because it means that is good for our game if players embrace it. The ability for players to do what Gary Player did is now expanded dramatically, but a lot of players aren't taking that upon themselves to do that.
The easier it's gotten, the less people have taken the opportunity to do it.
I should add Peter Thompson into that as well. He was also very good about traveling, especially around Asia, about growing the game like that. My personal opinion is that's how you grow the game is by in-person interactions and in-person inspirations with kids that don't really know much about the game yet. I don't think that you grow it through marketing campaigns based on driving distance. I don't think that feeds the right environment for our game. But
you giving a kid a golf ball that's signed at a golf tournament is a far more powerful magnet for the game than same kid seeing Matthew Wolff hit at 340 off the tee.
Absolutely. What the ultimate is for players to go to places where golf isn't super apparent and go and play exhibition matches and have kids see that in real life.
Old school.
In my opinion, that's the way to grow the game because you inspire a kid who's 11 who gets to watch 2 or 3 great players play against each other on his home course than you do more with that you can possibly do by reaching 10,000 people on Instagram with a post about Dustin Johnson's driving average last week.
And obviously both have their place, but I think you're right in terms of bang for buck and return on investment.
Bang for buck, yeah, absolutely. Because that
we all
kid
know the
has
story.
Parents and he has friends and it grows from there. But people are not too... they're not really into that kind of growth anymore. They want to see where are the numbers on Instagram.
Yeah, that's broader than just golf. We all know the impact, because Jeff's talked about it, of Ogilvy being able to jump his back fence and watch world-class golf on Royal Melbourne. And he went on to win a US Open. That's their life-changing things.
There's a connection there.
Yeah,
but I'm still optimistic because there's always been people through the history of our game that have corrected it when it's gotten off course. So I'm still optimistic that even though at the moment it probably doesn't seem... It probably seems like the capitalism forces are winning. I don't believe that will happen indefinitely.
There's some important voices in the game, aren't they, speaking for the game, and you're joining that chorus. I feel like I'm part of that chorus. We all feel we're on the right side. We all want to be on the right side of history if and when that moment ever comes. But which is not to say I don't listen to people who have different views, but I'm yet to be convinced. I'm open to being convinced that it's the best way forward for the game, but I'm yet to be convinced that.
And that's the thing. Like they have their vision for what the game should be and what it should achieve, and I guess we have our vision for what the game is and what it should be maintained as, and what it can still achieve if that is maintained. But I think, like you said, like we said at the beginning, everything has a different. Everyone has a different approach and a different view on it. I think that ultimately the right thing will be done. And ultimately what happens will happen because of who made it happen.
Yeah, indeed. I actually think ultimately the appeal of the sorts of things we're talking about is greater than the appeal of... I liken it a bit to fast food.
I agree. Yeah,
fast food's fantastic, but really you can't live on it. We all know that. So.
That's right. It's fantastic as a treat.
Yeah, that's exactly right, indeed. A couple of things to finish up on, Bryden. We've talked about the game broadly. You've talked about this awakening, epiphany, I don't know, something that's happened in the last 6 months. Can you touch perhaps on if there's something obvious there that's simple to sort of maybe explain? And then what's in the future for Bryden Macpherson? Of course, we've managed to go the whole time so far without mentioning the C word, but this whole coronavirus thing has changed everything. You're in... I don't know whether you're in lockdown. You're in Florida, aren't you? So no lockdown in Florida, but certainly not much in the way of tournament golf. What's the immediate future for Bryden Macpherson? What's going to happen with your golf? And what's
the immediate future is patience. We don't really know what's going to happen. We can only do the best that we can with the situation put in front of us. If that means that, well, the PGA Tour have announced that there'll be basically no Q School this year because status is going to roll over. You can view that however you'd like. You can view that. You can choose to view that as I don't have an opportunity for Q School. I'm choosing it to view it as I have 2 years to Monday qualify onto the Corn Ferry Tour. So there's lots of different ways to view this stuff. All you can do is give yourself the most opportunity that you can handle or that you can afford, and be ready for that opportunity when it comes. That's all you can do. You cannot do anything else. So that's all I'm focused on doing. My epiphany came in November last year after I finished my season disappointingly and knew I had to do something with my swing, and reached out to someone that I've known for a while who has now really come into the spotlight, and that's Brad Hughes. I started working with Hugo last November. I had spent some time with him over the years being down here in South Florida because Allenby lives here as well. Mm-hmm. So, and him and Hugo have done some stuff over the years. So I've spent some time with both of them and been pretty decent friends with Rob over the years. And I'd spent some time with Hugo in Australia when he first started teaching back in sort of 2012, 2013 because he's a Kingswood boy, originally Rossdale, then Kingswood, and Peninsula and Kingswood, so he would spend some time there. And he completely changed my view of the golf swing. I didn't know what I was doing. I was focused on how it looked instead of how it functioned. He taught me how it's supposed to function, and I've taken it from there and deepened my understanding of how the golf swing can work, not how the golf swing does work, because there's lots of different ways that it can work together. And this is, again, touching back on the theme of finding what works best for you. There is no proper way to swing a golf club. There are fundamentals you must touch on, but you should know how every part of your swing works together. And that's the nirvana that the best players, not many of them, but the best players achieve. So Hugo has opened my eyes to the possibilities of what the golf swing can be. I'm taking it a little bit beyond just what he teaches. Again, people who know me,
nobody will be surprised to hear.
No one will be surprised to know that I'm not taking it at face value, but what I'm doing is reading things now through a lens that Hugo has given me. So previously, if I was to pick up something like the golfing machine, which is the atypical, crazy, technical,
the Homer Kelly,
analogy of the golf swing, it's not a golfing method, it's a golfing anatomy book. It's how every part of the swing works together. I wouldn't have had any idea what to do. Hugo's given me a lens that I can read that through now. And it's helping me just incredible amounts. I'm able to understand how my swing works, how to hit the ball, how the physics of the golf swing work. And again, touch wood, it's the understanding that I've been searching for. And the lockdown's been good because I've been able to work on dry drills and change how my body moves. And the transformation in my swing from last November to now is just enormous.
Because whichever way you choose, the ultimate goal is to develop a physical action that when butterflies in the stomach, dry mouth, can't breathe, real pressure, real nerves, repeats the way it does when you stand on the range on a Thursday afternoon after the round, or on a Wednesday just hitting balls to warm up, that you can repeat the same action. That's the goal, isn't it? There's a million different ways to get there, but that's
I would actually disagree with that.
Oh, really?
I would say that the goal is to develop a swing that functions at its best when it's under pressure.
Oh, okay.
So I would not think that you would ever want to be able to hit a shot into the last hole at the US Open the way that you hit it on the range, because those are totally different situations. And one of them has the potential to be great and one of them doesn't. So you should be trying to tailor your swing, your equipment to that situation that is high pressure, not to the situation that is no pressure. So my goal is to understand how my swing works so that it can only function at its best when it has the most pressure on it.
Will you change the way you practice because of that? Do you then need to play money games in practice as opposed to hitting 50 balls on the range to make your swing work?
So the range stuff definitely has a part, but you're right. I've felt myself gravitating towards more pressure style golf, but without getting too detailed into it, I have my equipment set up now that it only works when I make it work. So if I make a relaxed swing like I might on the range, my equipment doesn't work.
Wow. Okay.
So my stuff is heavy and it's flat. My blades are at 6 degrees flat.
Oh, you really have gone full Hugo, haven't you?
Yeah, my stuff it's along the same lines as Hogan. He had his stuff crazy heavy, crazy flat, so that he knew he had to really work it to get it to go online. Because that way, in a pressure situation, you can't overcook it. So it's similar to all the downforce mechanisms on an F1 car. Not designed to go around a corner at 60 kilometers an hour. It's designed to go around a corner. The faster that you go, the more it sticks to the ground.
Wow.
So that's how my equipment's set up now, and that gives me feedback every time I play. So I don't stress when I'm playing recreationally and I'm hitting the ball terribly, because I have this constant feedback for, well, this equipment only works when I'm really stressing the shaft and moving fast and releasing it properly.
What did the people who built your clubs for you, when you went to them and said, this is what I want, what did they say?
That no one had ever asked for that before.
Certainly no one who's trying to make a living out of the game and has already proved quite proficient at the game. That's a quite dangerous thing to do in some ways, again.
So this is something, again, that I very well maybe proved wrong on one day. People say that you make 80% of your money from 20% of your events. I would think you would want equipment that's going to work for you the best when you're playing your best, so you can rely on it. So if you're standing there in the 18th fairway, stressed, sweating, shaking, adrenaline just pumping through you, wouldn't you want equipment that's going to work for you then, not when you're on the range?
Sure. Because me personally, I just want someone else playing, because I'm not that guy. I'm not the pressure guy, so don't give me the ball.
and this is something, again, in my personal opinion, the folly of sports psychology is trying to avoid pressure and avoid nerves. You can't do that. you'll always have that. You'll always be nervous. You'll always have adrenaline. You'll always have an extra 5 mile per hour club head speed when you're under pressure. So why wouldn't you want equipment that's going to fit that situation, so that then when you're not in that situation, because that's obviously your peak state, that's when you're at your absolute best.
That's why
no one's at their absolute best when they've had 3 beers and swinging it smooth on the range, right? When you're clear-minded, when you're focused, when you're adrenaline filled, that's when you're at your peak state. So if you're always trying to achieve that as often as possible, why wouldn't you have equipment, i.e. feedback, as a yardstick to tell you when you're there or when you're not? Yeah. So I know now when I'm playing, if I hit a good shot, it was a good swing. And I know that what my equipment's going to do, it doesn't go left. It is predictable, and it is my yardstick for my swing. And it might be right, but it feels right. Okay. So I really think that this may be a good way for me, as someone who's not really that satisfied with mediocrity, to operate with this. There's a chance that maybe one day I might go to a more cavity back iron, maybe slightly less flat. But if it becomes apparent that I'm actually giving away shots for no reason, if I can still create that same environment under pressure, that I know that I can't overload my equipment. I just got from these guys in LA, these new shafts, wood shafts that tip out at about 11 on the rifle scale. I can't overload them. It's so hard to make the ball turn over, because I have to work to make it to go straight with my driver and 3-wood. That is great, because I know that I swing it 7 or 8 miles per hour faster under pressure. So I want stuff that's going to fit that. It's kind of the way that I've chosen to approach improving my swing with Hugo, because I know that if I can make this stuff work, I'm a good ball striker. So that's really simple in my mind. So it's a really great, use the term yardstick. It's a great yardstick for me and my swing, because if your equipment is fit to what you were doing when you were on the range at the fitting studio, how do you know what your swing's doing? But if your equipment is set up to function in a high stress environment under pressure in competitive golf, that's what you want to do, right? That's your goal, is to do that. So if you have that always as a reminder in your bag, isn't that a good thing?
We're going to find out, aren't we?
We'll find out.
Because there's somebody out there experimenting with it, and there's somebody who did the shades of the Molinari approach in that, isn't there? Isn't that what he did with Dave Allred? The pressure putting games.
Yeah.
Before he won the Open, it was the real pressure putting games and all that sort of stuff. So
the idea that you should leave your practice frustrated because it was difficult is like character and pressure building. Yeah, there's definitely a functionality in that for sure.
Yeah, concept is interesting. Well, Bryden, I've wanted to have you on this show right since we launched it, because you think outside the box. Anybody who wasn't convinced that you think outside the box, just listen to that last 10 minutes. I can't think there's another golf pro in the world who is tackling what you have done. Fantastic to catch up with you. All the best with all of that. When golf does restart, you said you got Monday qualifying for the KFT. Do we know if China's going to restart? Are you planning to go back there? You've had a lot of success there. We didn't get to talk about it. I was going to ask you about that. Just winning is important. It doesn't matter where you do it. Winning is an important ingredient and thing to have done as a pro golfer, so that it's, you can do it. So what's that immediate future hold?
If the China Tour, not PGA Tour China, if they resume with a European Tour card at the end of the carrot for this year, I'll do everything in my power to get over there and do it. My prediction is that maybe they'll do a wraparound season, seems like what most things are doing. So if I can get over there safely, I have a fiance, so coming home to her is important to make sure that I'm safe and healthy and not going to put her at risk. So there's a lot of factors to consider. But again, people who know me, I will be pushing the boundaries, trying to sort of do whatever I can, wherever I can, to try and do the best I can.
Fantastic. It's been a joy to watch your career to this point, Bryden, and it's going to continue to be a joy to watch it develop from here on in. It's been fantastic to get a bit of an insight today. Thanks for taking some time, mate. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Rod.
Well, that's it for episode 19. As always, I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. As he mentioned there, Bryden is unclear about his immediate golf future, but when the game does return to something approaching normal, I hope that he has a few more fans than he did when this whole virus blew up. Now, we're lurching from one golf bro to the next at the moment on the thing about golf, and that trend continues in a fortnight when it'll be a huge pleasure to catch up with one of only 4 Australians ever to don the green and gold for golf at the Olympics. Scott Hend is our guest next time on The Thing About Golf.